Welcome to the 16:30 UK British Standard Time session for this year's 2020 SM ITM Group Conference. I know that's a massive mouthful, so I'll explain some of that to you in a moment. So this year's conference, we're a specialist group at the British Computer Society, specialising in service management, ITAM, and asset management. Service management, configuration, and asset management. They were the three groups that we were previously, and we're all consolidated under one banner now. This year's conference, we're focusing on 2020, the digital workplace revolution, and obviously it's been accelerated quite a bit in relation to, or in some organisations, certainly in relation to the pandemic. And so some of the things that we're really interested in finding out what has happened in each company, in your experience as an employee, in your processes, in any of the ITIL processes as well that might be impacted, what's been good, what hasn't been good, and we're trying to bring all those threads together throughout this conference. And you will have an opportunity to ask questions and follow the threads of all of those things in our panel session, which is the final session that we have on Wednesday evening this week. That session will be hosted by Richard Josie, who's the chair of our specialists group. Just a little bit about us at the BCS, and for those of you that don't know us, we merged with the service management group last year. We're actually a group of volunteers, and we put on networking and professional events once a month generally on topics in relation to service management, ITSM management, or SAM, and configuration, release, anything around transformation as well. You're welcome to contact us if you'd like to be a presenter for any of those things, or even to join our group so that you can attend those networking sessions. Previously, we used to do them face-to-face in London, but obviously we've had to go online this year due to the pandemic and the restrictions that we have around socialising. So a few things about today. We've got a hashtag, which is #SMITAM CONF 2020, and that's the hashtag that we're using on Twitter to follow the threads through the conference. So if you'd like to comment, please include those that hashtag on your tweets, and also look for that hashtag to see what other tweets you may have missed from the other sessions that we've already had today. So what I do want to quickly cover is a few things about the topic, or about the presentations that we've got. We've already had the keynote presentation that was pre-recorded, and that was released last Thursday. So hopefully you've had a chance to have a listen to Claire. Claire will be back with us in our panel session hosted by Richard on Wednesday, and most of our other presenters who it's an appropriate time will be able to come back and join us for that session. And when I say that appropriate time, we've got global presenters from different parts of the world, which is why it works for some and it doesn't work for certain areas, depending on which part of the hemisphere, which hemisphere they're in. So this is our third session today, and we'll hand over to Mark shortly to talk to us about enterprise service management. But tomorrow there is a 10 o'clock session which is being delivered by Amit Verma, and he's in India. He's presenting on mergers and acquisitions. Our 1 o'clock session tomorrow is being delivered by Jonathan Lipton on full stack outsourcing. And the 18:30, and these are all British Standard Time, session tomorrow is by Desiree Weiss, who's presenting on SAP vendor management, governance, licensing, and service management. Fairly comprehensive topic, so please join us to hear what she has to say on that. Wednesday, we had 3 sessions, and that's the final day of our conference. The 10 o'clock session is Hannah Price, covering the hero culture and a damaging mentality for collaboration and success. 1 o'clock, we've got Oliver Cronk, who's talking to us about the evolution of business as usual. And obviously the 18:30 session, which is the combination or the consolidation of the whole event, as Richard is hosting. And we'll have a slide that will pop up for each presentation that we've had throughout this 3 days, and also one for the keynote. Just to tie all of the topics together in case you didn't have an opportunity to attend some of them due to work or other commitments. And then you'll have an opportunity to propose your questions and be part of the discussions that we have with all of the panelists attending at that session. If you do miss any of the sessions and you do want to catch up them, we will have videos available of these. All the sessions are being recorded, and they'll be available in about 3 weeks' time when they're produced from the BCS team. We'll have them published on our website as well. Contacting us, you can contact us as a group from the conference website. On the About page, there's a link to our BCS website. There's a link to connecting to us through LinkedIn, and also a link to email us for joining as a member of our committee. You can join up with us on LinkedIn through our service management and ITAM group. So please feel free to put a request if you'd like to join us through that route. Now, the format for today's session is we are going to encourage you to ask questions. And when you do ask questions on your panel, you'll find a question box. And so you pop your questions into those. And what we will do is I will bring those questions forward to Mark when he has intervals throughout the presentation. He'll stop and ask for questions, and a number of the questions will be saved to the end just to ensure that we can get through all of the content that Mark has got for us this evening. So it will be interactive. Do put comments and questions in there, and we'll get them all answered throughout this 1 hour session, or maybe a bit shorter than 1 hour. Okay, and that's it from me. So enjoy the session, and over to you, Mark, to go through today's presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
All good, right. Yeah, today's presentation is going to be quite wide-ranging, so please bear with me as we go through this. We'll try and keep everything as real as possible with examples throughout. So if you are getting lost, just hang about. There will be an example coming up where I'll try and unpack some of this a little bit more. It can be quite theoretical at times, but at the same time, we should be able to turn that theory into practice. So let's make a start. So today we're going to look at service management, what it is, where it comes from, and why it matters. And we do this against a backdrop of increasing global uncertainty at the moment. And I'm sure many of you have lost at least some sleep over wondering how that uncertainty is going to affect you, your families, or your organizations. This really is a global problem that we face at the moment with this uncertainty increasing. So the usual solutions that we get told about, we should look for more technology, we should change our ways of working slightly, or we should become more agile. These things are good, but they're not enough. Fundamentally, the world is changing, uncertainty is on the increase, so we need to deal with that. And more importantly, uncertainty affects our whole enterprise as well. It's not just targeted departments that we can get away with making changes to anymore. So we need to really start thinking holistically, thinking enterprise with how we deal with this. And in order to do that today, we're going to ask ourselves 3 questions. Firstly, exactly what is this challenge that we're dealing with? What is this uncertainty that we're facing? Where does it come from? Secondly, how have we dealt with it before? And therefore, how should we respond? And that second question may be interesting to you. How have we dealt with it before? Well, you see, we have dealt with it before. Or rather, IT has dealt with it, been dealing with complex systems for years. The rate of change has been quite high, and there's been a lot of uncertainty in it. And yet, as many of you will know who've been working in IT, service management has come to the rescue and has really helped, IT service management has really helped provide that structure to cope. Imagine running your IT shop without IT service management. It'd be quite difficult indeed. So we're going to look at service management today, but as was mentioned, it needs to be enterprise. But you can't just simply take ITSM, rebadge it enterprise, throw it over the fence to our business colleagues and expect them to deal with it. All right, we've got to go back to what is service management. What are the fundamental concepts that underpin it? We've got to take IT out of the equation in order to really see that and to create a framework for true enterprise service management. So we'll do that by going back in time. We'll go back to an era before IT. We'll go back and see how the Romans, how the ancients managed their commerce. And we'll hopefully see some striking similarities. We'll then use these fundamental concepts that we discover from Roman times and try and build up our own framework. As I mentioned, a true enterprise service management framework that is completely agnostic of IT. We'll then build up together this framework And then seeing as this is a service management and IT asset management conference, why don't we try and use that framework then to derive some known good practice on configuration, see what the framework is saying about it. And this framework does exist. This is the Enterprise Service Management Framework that we're kind of debuting today. But I don't really want you to just take my word for it with what I'm saying today. The framework's available. You can go and have a look. You can ask questions throughout. And also, as we go through this presentation, we're going to try and derive the concepts together. So you're going to be able to see where it comes from, the logic you can follow to get there. So I hope it'll be quite foundational at times, but I hope that really it will inspire you to look again at service management and think how you can take this out to other parts of the organization, and just to really be inspired that there is some good structure here that we can use to cope with this uncertainty. So a little bit about me. So I've worked in IT for a number of years now as a consultant with Deloitte across both the UK and New Zealand. I started out in retail in a point of sale replatforming program. Started out in PMO and then worked through gradually every other work stream on that program, including my own managing my own project. I then went to another retail and was kind of elevated quite quickly into a program management role, doing both program management, project management, and on some occasions tech lead for about 12 different projects. Needless to say, it was a very good experience. It was also a very busy time as well. But all of that really gave me a grounding as a consumer of service management. So I was sitting on project side and I was looking at how we could take a project and how we could land it into a live operational environment. And of course, you've got operations teams there going, oh, you need to fill this in, you need to do this. And you kind of sitting there as a project going, yeah, but that doesn't help my timeline. It's when you start to realize, when you start to empathize with their situation, you realize that actually the operations folks are trying to do a service to the organization by keeping the lights on. They don't want you to break things by chucking things over the fence to them really quickly. They need to know how to support it, and that's quite important to get. So I was able to act as that kind of conduit between the project and the operations teams through that, and really got a bit more interested in service management and ITIL and kind of what it had to say about what we did. So then I moved into New Zealand after that and took up Servicenow, which, as many of you will know, is a tool set that actually implements a lot of IT service management. It's your foundational tool set that you run incidents, problems, changes, etc. through. So actually configuring that, you kind of get exposure to this stuff across a number of organizations. And one of those clients that I had kind of really challenged us. And they said that they needed to move to a new SIAM-based operating model. They wanted to do an IT transformation. So this is moving to service integration and management. So the idea is that rather than having a massive in-sourced IT shop, you can plug and play vendors, which gives you a lot more agility because you can go, oh, this vendor is leading the way. Therefore, we'll bring them into our ecosystem and we'll just plug them into all of our existing IT service management processes. But not only were they trying to tackle IT, they were quite forward thinking, quite world leading in some respects, because they started to realize that actually there's a lot of blurring lines between business and IT. So why not join IT that's relevant to a single business unit into that business unit, give one owner accountability for the lot, and then if the IT breaks, they know who to go to and they can get it fixed rather than having to wait for someone to say, oh, it's not my problem, we'll get it fixed for you by tomorrow, kind of thing. So that was a real challenge. And as a result of this, as a result of outsourcing a lot of stuff, the internal IT team collapsed by about 90%. So that was the plan. So as you can imagine, all of these heavy ITSM, ITIL v3 processes that we're running through with 20 odd change approvers required weren't going to cut it. So I had to really take everything back to first principles and look, well, what are these ITIL processes trying to achieve? And to be fair to ITIL v3 at the time, it was 11 years old. Agile was quite new, and DevOps, was only really just coming in. So it's very much operation centric and kind of the previous era. But yeah, so actually taking this back to first principles and then rebuilding these processes to make them a lot more integrated and efficient. And out of that, this sort of framework for enterprise service management was born. And when ITIL 4 came out afterwards, it was quite quite good to really see how close some of those concepts were, and that was quite encouraging. I hope you'll see some of those themes coming out today, because we are ultimately trying to explain the same phenomena within our organization. So cool, so I will kick into the presentation now. We'll take questions after every session, as I mentioned, but as this is the first session, we'll make some progress. So really getting into that first question of what exactly is this challenge that we're facing? What is this disruption? Where does it come from? Why do we have so much uncertainty in the world? I'll give quite a quick overview of this, really. So it's processing power has gone up, has doubled in the last every 4 years or so, same as data storage, so the narrative goes. So all of this gives us a lot more shiny technology to play with. And of course, with more new things, it means you have more old things and therefore more obsolete things. And that's what's keeping business leaders up. That if you don't keep up with the pace of change, then you get disrupted, you become obsolete, and that's not a good place to be for any business, as you can imagine. These are exponential curves. So with an exponent, we're only ever on the flat bit. Previously change has been quite modest. The problem is that we face this wall of change, this upward exponential part of the curve, and the change keeps getting more and more pronounced. And as we exceed our capacity to change, we can get disrupted. So it's important that we grow and change within the needs of the market, but also within our capacity as well. So increasing our capacity for change will allow us to cope with the exponents. All right, so we need to shift our response on this. Yeah, so I was challenged by a presentation that the Productivity Commission of New Zealand gave, because that's pretty much a traditional narrative that you'll hear from most consultancies, saying that, we've got an exponential growth all the time, and you need to do something about it. But this Productivity Commission speaker was saying that, yeah, that's not how the data bears out. And he's got a point, and he had a point. All right, so on the left, this is the traditional narrative. This is what people have looked at. This is the third industrial revolution. So the last one, as in when steam-powered cotton mills came in, and it's rather than having one person making a shirt, you can then have a steam-powered loom, and you can make thousands a day, and you can use that extra capacity to then invest. You can use the capital to invest in more machines and thus grow productivity exponentially. So that's great, and that works, and we know that theory holds at a micro level for certain industries. But yet, over the course of the Industrial Revolution, productivity growth was actually pretty modest. It was about 3%. Now, potentially they could say that is because two things. So one, the Industrial Revolution was quite a large period of time, but also these machines affected just sort of one or two industries. The steam-powered cotton loom was great for producing cotton stuff, but not much good for banking or for finance or for legal or for shopkeepers. There was other industries didn't benefit quite so much from the technology. But yet today, that paradigm doesn't hold, because everybody's got a smartphone, everybody's got a laptop, everyone can do things, communicate, collaborate over Trello and all sorts of other stuff these days. And you think technology is absolutely everywhere. Therefore, why are we not seeing this massive productivity growth that we'd expect? Why are we not seeing it accelerate with this supposed exponential growth in technology? And if you look at the New Zealand productivity growth over the last 20 years, it's a similar story around the world as well. The productivity growth itself has actually fallen over the last 20 years. But why on earth is this the case? Well, I put it to you that we know that exponential growth and disruption exists. We can't really deny that. We can see the rates of change around us. But yet businesses can't adapt quickly enough to it. So if you think about your own organization, and the amount of choices that are before you at the moment, the amount of analysis you need to do in order to figure out which is the right choice as well. You can have a choice in front of you, but how do you know that choice is right? How do you know that that's going to be a sustainable choice? Well, it means that you then have to do a load of analysis around this as well, and we get more choices thrown in, and by the time you've finished a monolithic business case, the world's moved on. Right, so all of these sort of ways of working type things are really not helping us deal with the complexity and chaos at the moment. So that is creating this uncertainty, And it's really holding us back. You know, we should be in this so-called fourth industrial revolution at the moment. We should be seeing massive growth from this technology, but we're just not. So really, if we can tackle this complexity and chaos, then you know, any organization, I think you can see on the upward arrow is going to be streets ahead of their competitors, and anyone still caught on the downward is going to languish behind and potentially become obsolete and their business fold. So it's really important that we get this and we do something about it, and we tackle it holistically for the enterprise. So let's have a look at how we've dealt with it before. So all of this uncertainty. So IT has been dealing with complex systems for years, and at the beginning it was fine to just do that on an ad hoc basis. IT just gave a bit of support, but as IT became more complex and more critical for business operations, business went, you're providing a service to us, we need you to do that within defined service levels, as in we can't afford for the lights to go off today because our business falls over. So IT is enabling the business, we need some structure around it, and thus IT service management was born. But yet simply enabling the business is not enough. You can't just throw tools across the business and say, here you go, you know, the tool's working, we're all good, aren't we? Not quite, that may not necessarily be what the business wants. So therefore, the business wanted some partnership. They wanted to get more involved with IT, and they wanted to set the agenda and say, IT, we've got this business problem that we want to deal with. We want this outcome. Please help us. Therefore, it becomes a partnership. Now you can start to see the lines blurring a little bit more. Businesses getting involved with IT. Right, and that's where we get to with sort of ITIL v3, getting into ITIL 4. But yet some bright sparks have noticed that facilities, HR, they're also doing things as well, such as you know, a help desk that they may be running. They're dealing with customer requests. They're dealing with issues. Now, why don't we pull some resource together? Why don't we have a shared service that we offer? You know, have common ways of working across facilities, IT, and HR, and that works rather well for many organisations that have started doing this today. IT is essentially merging with part of the business. But what if we push this to its extreme? And this is what I argue, that the people who do this are doing enterprise shared services, not enterprise service management. Because if you do enterprise service management, you push this to its extreme, you completely break down the barriers between IT and business. You almost consume the business, consume IT into the business, or at least you give yourself the option to. You get rid of that arbitrary distinction between IT and business. Because after all, IT in many cases is now directly providing customer services, and all services involve IT in some form or another. So if you want to, and it's appropriate, you should be able to put your IT in whichever service makes most sense. And that implies that you need common ways of working that cover both business and IT. Right? You can't just have IT service management, because then you have siloed IT. We need to get rid of that. We need to blow it out. And that is what enterprise service management will be. That's where we're looking at what we're looking at today. So what exactly has IT got that's helped it cope? Why is it coped? And we know that you know, with things like ITIL as the de facto standard for IT service management, but also there's other frameworks, methodologies, and philosophies that also show a little bit of a part of service management as well. So for instance, TOGAF looks at architecture. It provides a repository for content. It also provides a lifecycle development as well for doing architecture and iterating it. You've got IT for IT that's looking at more of a data model that underpins the business of IT itself. You've got COBIT looking upwards towards governance. You've got SIAM saying how you can bring your vendors together and plug and play. That works quite well with Agile, because it's almost Agile vendor management effectively. You've got Lean that's coming from the business world to try and take all of these processes that IT has and make them more efficient. And then, of course, you've got DevOps about taking ownership and shortening that delivery lifecycle as well. Now, what all these things are doing, because they can seem to conflict, they can seem like discrete topics in their own right, but as we've said, we want to get it to an enterprise framework. So really what we say is that all of these are describing just a different facet, a different aspect of the organization, aren't they, effectively? And so how do we bring them all together? You know, to use the analogy, it's like an elephant that you've never seen an elephant before. You're blindfolded or you're blind, whatever, depending on the story you read. You go up to it and you're given part of the elephant, and you have to describe it to someone who also can't see it. and someone else gets a tusk, someone else gets a leg. You're all describing something perfectly, and that description is entirely correct, but yet it's not the full picture. You've got to put all of the information together to actually understand that you're dealing with an elephant. And today we're dealing with service management, and these are all parts of it, effectively. So that's IT service management, and we've seen how IT has dealt with it before. But now, as we mentioned, we need to really understand what service management is by taking IT out of the equation. That will allow us to get to an enterprise model. So to do that, we're going to go back in time to ancient Rome and have a look at how the ancients managed their commerce. But firstly, I'll take a pause for a couple of questions.
Hey, so the first question I've got here is from David. And David asked, is part of the, sorry, I'm just scooted down the screen. So he said here, is ITIL version 3 used to mix up useful logical framework with legacy use cases? Does ITIL version 4 separate the logic in a better view?
I think there's still that crossover a little bit as well. So yeah, I mean, ITIL 4 has just recently been released, and I think many organizations are still proving it out. So they've kind of split the content into a number of books, and then you've got all of the practices guidance as well. So I think he's right that it does still mix the two. I don't really see a clear distinction between them. I kind of want to put that to you today, really, that we can get a lot more clarity out of it. So let's take it back to the fundamental principles, and let's try and build up our own framework ourselves, and then we can compare this to ITIL and others. So what ITIL is doing is not necessarily wrong. It's just describing part of a picture from a certain viewpoint effectively. And there's those viewpoints that we want to kind of tease out today.
Got another one here. Just have one more from David before you go on to the next section is, if service management goes beyond just IT, good, but how do we break down the cultural silos between IT and business management?
Yeah, I hope here's where we, so kind of perhaps we're not going to answer that question directly today, but by giving a framework for enterprise service management, we're kind of breaking it down as a de facto thing. It's just by default, it's broken down. So once you kind of give this kind of model for the whole organization, you go, well, that doesn't exist anymore, so why are we still maintaining it? It's that kind of approach. Yeah.
I think it's probably also,
Cool.
just a comment from me, a little bit more important now that we are maybe dispersed and not in the same offices like we used to be, that service management has to probably have more regular contact with the business really to build those relationships and check what's happening.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, effectively, there needs to be no distinction, and in the next section we'll kind of see that, because we're going to take IT out of the equation, and hopefully it will still be quite familiar to you today.
All right.
So we're good to go through. Okay, so let's go back in time to ancient Rome. So this was from my visit to Pompeii, and this is as you can see, it's a Roman store, effectively. And what struck me from visit to Pompeii was just kind of how civilized it is, how sort of almost modern equivalent you could look at. So I mean, here is a counter, and we've got these bowls or pots in the counter. I mean, today that'd probably be stainless steel with a glass counter in front of it, but effectively is holding some kind of food or beverage, or maybe it's olive oil, maybe it's wine or grain or something. But anyway, let's imagine it's a Roman fast food store. So think about it, you're a Roman citizen. How can you interact with the store? So as a consumer, you can go up to the store and you can use it. You can make a purchase. You can go and if they gave you the wrong item back, you could say, I've got an issue with that. Could you please swap it for the correct item? Or maybe there's a request you want to make of them. Maybe it's a menu item that needs to be freshly prepared. So there's a set of steps to follow that the organization will need to do. Or maybe it's an idea for a new service. Maybe you want them to cater for your wedding, but they don't currently do that at the moment. So you can go and you can give that idea and they'll consider it. And then maybe they'll put in place an initiative and actually get that service stood up. Maybe you've got an ongoing relationship with them. Maybe you've got some credit that's open. Maybe you need to discuss sort of your ongoing delivery schedule, something like that. or you'd hope perhaps that the organization would come and seek some feedback from you occasionally as well as a valued customer. So there's no smartphones, there's no portal, there's no telephony. You just simply go up and have a face-to-face conversation. But I hope you can agree that all of these 6 are discrete types of interaction that you could have with that organization. And if we agree, then we can put them into a model effectively. And we notice that there are some patterns around this. There's a pattern of 4. So use, of course, we're using the store. But we could also seek some support with the store. Either we want an unstructured support request for an issue, or we want a structured support request, which is an actual request. So come in and so a request has a repeatable set of steps to fulfill it, whereas an issue doesn't. It's a lot more ad hoc. You know, for instance, the food is cold is just a random question that comes in, and then you've got to do something about it. Do you heat it up? Do you give the customer a different fresh batch? Yeah, that's kind of at discretion. It's solving an issue. Requests a lot more structured. Menu items follow a process, follow a recipe. You've got ideas. Now the service doesn't offer this. This is part of the management of the service. So we're now engaging with management. The idea is there. The service doesn't currently offer it. Would the store like to offer this service? Is basically what we're asking. Or you've got relationship, as I mentioned, in there as part of that management. And finally, feedback is part of governance. It's the monitor aspect of governance. But yet, interaction is not enough. We need to actually deliver off the back of that as a store. So we need to make things available for use. We need to control our stock levels. We need to fix incidents. So for instance, if that issue of the food being cold is because the fire's gone out, that's an incident. We need to fix it. We've got tasks to fulfill requests. We've got initiatives that get stood up to deal with ideas and turn them into practice. We've got a mix of providers together that are providing the service levels that underpin those relationships with consumers. And then we've got an organization there to direct the previous mentioned delivery. And what service management's taught us over the years, especially for IT, is that there's another layer needed as well to ensure that the delivery happens. In times of uncertainty, just simply delivering is not enough. We also need to be proactive as well. So you've got continuity to ensure availability. And what happens if a supplier can't deliver one day, because their town's been cut off, for instance? What happens if one of these incidents keeps occurring? The fire keeps going out early in the morning. Maybe it's because everyone's diverted on other tasks and they can't watch it. That's a problem. We can get to the root cause of it. Maybe there's some change control needed around dishes that go out. So maybe the menu's been freshly prepared, but it's by a trainee chef. Maybe the sous chef or the head chef wants to have a look over that dish before it goes out for the first time, employing a bit of change control to that. Maybe there's release as well. Maybe, as we release initiatives, we want our stakeholders to accept them, because ultimately if they don't accept them, then we don't get the value from that release. So this is where you get things like, well, testing that release might be a good thing. Communicating with our stakeholders, making sure we've got everyone's in the know and they've bought into it as well. That will help the stakeholders accept it. So this is what release is all about. And when we release our wedding service, you can see that these things will come into play. We've also got a portfolio as well. So this is about making sure that we're offering the correct services for the business as well, making sure our releases, providers, and initiatives are all working together in line with the organization's strategy. So these are the ensuring practices. And the final layer underneath this is effectively understanding. So this is about the information that our store will need to have. So we'll need to have some knowledge of what are the configuration assets we hold. We'll need to have some kind of knowledge for how we deal with issues. There'll be some experience there. There'll be some idea of risks and costs associated with the business, especially if they're balancing the books at the end of the day. Because even back in Roman times, this was still an issue. Measurement and reporting, especially if the store owner is not present on site, they're going to want some reports. How does the store communicate holistically? And then also trying to derive some insight from the market so you can target that strategy and portfolio at the correct segments of the market as well. So I hope you can agree all these things still relevant even in Roman times. No need to actually involve IT at all at this point. But each of these represents a common set of activities the organization should perform in order to offer sustainable services effectively. So this is really the how of the organization. It's how it operates. So you might be thinking, well, okay, that's great. So that's the how, but what does the organization do that makes it unique? Because every organization is different. And this is where the services come in. This is the what of the organization. So our organization, we've said, is offering food as a service, beverages as a service, and we're also going to look at offering event catering or weddings as a service as well. So these are the services, and let's have a look at how a service is structured. So we've got our organization that we mentioned, and our store owner, who's the organization, is going to possibly have a manager in place who's going to act as integrator. They're going to be a broker between the providers and the consumers and the organization themselves. They sit in the middle and they help the organization. The organization is going to have monitored the market. They're going to evaluate it. There's a need for this wedding service, and therefore they're going to direct the integrator to go out and appoint a provider and make this service available for use. So the provider could just be an employee, or they could be an outsourcer. That's now commissioning the service. It's now available for use. That was our first aspect. The consumer is then going to use the service, and they're going to do it so in line with a service contract, which describes how the world should be. This may well not be, and in most of the cases, it's not a written contract, especially in Roman times, but it's a set of expectations that the consumer holds about the service. So for instance, they expect that if they put an order for food, that they get that order delivered to them as specified. They don't want a different set of food, because if they do, that's an issue to them, and they'll notice an issue with that service, and they're entitled to go and seek some support. So they'll go back to the store attendant, and they'll interact with the support service of the organization. We're now not in BAU anymore, we're into support mode. And there's going to be a set of expectations around that as well. So if the food's wrong, then you'd expect it swapped over. Again, different set of expectations here. If you've waited 10 minutes for your food under the service contract, you're probably only going to want to wait a couple of minutes under the support contract because you've already waited 10 minutes. So you've got a different set of expectations here. And if those expectations are not met, then you may well escalate up to the store owner or the management of the service to say, hey, the store attendant was rude, they didn't do what I asked, they were slow. And then if those expectations of how they deal with it aren't met, then you may well take your business elsewhere. So it's important to manage these expectations and understand these factors in play and understand the difference between using a service and supporting a service. This allows you to have a set of SLAs almost that are tied to the service and split those and keep them very distinct from your support SLAs. At the end of the day, if all your service SLAs are met, you shouldn't really need your support ones. So it's quite useful to keep that. And I often see those getting confused. So really good to keep the distinction. Cool. So now we will go and have a look at, hopefully we can agree that this is timeless stuff, applies to Romans, applies today. So we'll go through and have a look at how we can take some of these concepts and build it into a model for our modern digital organization and start building up a framework for enterprise service management. First of all, any questions?
Yeah, we've got a couple here. David again has asked, if service management is fully integrated with IT is part of the business, is the limit when AI and machine learning recognize and address the service management patterns or anti-patterns, and then it becomes systemic?
Yeah, I mean, effectively, go on, sorry.
I was going to say, he's also asked another question to that, which is about regulators, and do regulators affect practices, and must this be referenced as, for example, regulators are stakeholders in the service management process? And so both of those combined.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, I mean, in terms of the AI question, effectively AI and people are kind of, to some extent, interchangeable. So other aspects, there will always be a human aspect there, but decision making, you know, whether it's performed by a machine or an individual, at the end of the day, is what are we bringing to the table? You know, and we'll see that you can be quite agnostic to that. It depends on the situation and the industry you're in as to which one you use. So we'll come on to that and shortly, hopefully, as well. We'll touch on that as part of the assets. And the other question was around, again, Marilyn?
Regulators.
Regulators
So,
coming in, yeah.
Yeah, does regulation affect practices and must be referenced, and also regulators are stakeholders in service management process?
They are definitely. I mean, these are fundamental practices that you would need in order to run a sustainable organization, we're saying. And these are defined by so these will all have definitions together that you can infer and derive from the diagram effectively. And when you then go and produce the guidance that relates to each of these. So what exactly is change? How are we going through it? What is release? Who are those stakeholders? That's when your regulations come in, and that's when you have to tailor this guidance for your own industry effectively. We're just saying that there is some concept that is release management, and it needs to exist, or it is considered, even if it's informally. How you then go about doing that is when we need to start actually deriving the practice guidance here, and then tailoring it for an organization's circumstances. Hope that sort of answers it.
Yeah, well, he's actually said
Cool.
he really meant augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence. So that's kind of a different
Augmented,
angle on it. Yeah,
halfway. Yeah, that's all good.
yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, there's a spectrum, there's a scale there, all the way from human involvement through augmenting through to fully automating. So yeah, it's all kind of one and the same. That's kind of more the what, and it's more industry specific. Today we're kind of looking a bit more at the how and the theory that sits behind it.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Cool, no worries. So yeah, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to build these concepts into a bit of a framework together for the organization. So exactly how you interpret this framework is kind of up to you within your own context of your organization. We're just saying that these things exist, these concepts exist at the moment. And we've seen how services exist and that practices exist as well. So services represent the what of the organization, practices represent the how. We've also seen a number of aspects of our organization as well. We've seen how using the organization is not simply enough. You also need to provide support around it, you need to manage it, and you need to govern it. So those are 4 aspects that we've got. We've also got 4 actors as well. So consumer and provider, will be familiar from ITIL. And then service integration and management, SIAM, throws in an integrator as well to help manage when there's multiple providers, multiple consumers, and how to get them talking to each other. Because you don't want as a consumer to have to go through and figure out who to deal with. You just want to go to one person. So that's the integrator concept. And finally, ITSM would add in an organization as well. This is a critical actor to recognize because at the end of the day, the organization is commissioning the service. The organization's the reason it's there. The organization will define value for that service. Because it's all well and good being employee-centric and customer-centric, but at the end of the day, if you're not deriving value for the organization won't bother. Therefore, the being consumer-centric may generate more value for the organization, but to take a pretty not nice example, loan sharks, for instance, don't really care about their customers effectively because it's not making them money. Now, I'm not saying that that's right, but considering the organization helps you to understand why some of these trends occur. And likewise, we also have assets as well. So this was the old people, process, and technology. But as you can see here, I've replaced people. We've replaced people with purpose. So essentially, it's what is, people in an organization need to have purpose in order to become assets. If people don't have purpose, then they're not really assets. They're more of a liability because you're paying them to not have a purpose. So this is where you can get in what is the purpose of that individual? What are they doing? What is their role? And then they will become an actor in these services as well. So by actually using them in the services, then that's when you generate value, and that's why they are an asset to you. And likewise, AI has a place in that as well. So we're kind of saying that, we've seen with AI that we don't necessarily need to specify that it is a person or it is a machine. It could be either. The point is you make that choice dependent on the situation. Here, we're just saying that there is a concept of purpose that we need to have, and that is in itself an asset. So this model, effectively, we're saying that each of these 4 assets here together make up a complete picture of the organization. And we know that that's the case because when we get an end of year financial report, it'll list all the assets that the organization holds on a balance sheet, and it'll say, an accountant will sign off and say, this is a true and accurate representation of the organization. This is everything that the organization has. It's all of their assets together. And that's true. But could you also not say that an organization is all of the stakeholders together? So if you know all the stakeholders, then you know the organization. I mean, at the end of the day, organizations are for people. So if you had all of that information, you have a complete picture of the organization. But likewise, you could also say the operating model of the organization, all of the entities and structures within it, that also makes up the organization. I mean, did the executives miss to add on a whole part of the organization that they don't do from their operating model? No, they covered it all. They got it all in there. They know everything that they do. And so that we can split up an organization in that way. And likewise, that model that I showed you before from the Roman store, got all these aspects and all these practices. Again, hopefully you can agree that this pretty much covers everything that a sustainable store needs to do in terms of the how. And each of these is giving us a different picture of the organization. They're all correct, they're all slightly different. And this is why we're calling it dimensions of the organization here. So we need to understand each of these. Now, what this model is useful for is for thinking through how we structure, how we design effectively. We want to move to a state. We'll go into that a little bit more. What we do is we start off and we said, let's take our example of a wedding service. So we know we want a service. So you can point to services within the entities, and now you work round. So work round the rest of the diagram, and it helps you consider and helps you build out your design and make sure you consider everything. So you can start off by asking, okay, so who's involved? Who are our consumer? Who's our provider? How are we going to integrate this service? And who is the organization? And then we can go in and start asking, what do they want? What is their definition of value? What is utility to them? What is warranty to them? What is experience to them? So we can ask these 4 things for each of these 4 actors. Likewise, we can ask what tools do we need? What's our processes? What's our data? What's our decisions and roles that we need to have in there in order to deliver this? Do we need some craft? Do we need some food? What are the components of a wedding are that we need to offer? These would be the assets that we need to acquire. And finally, we've got that wedding service available for use, but we also need to support, manage, and govern it as well. So getting those practices up and running is also critical for getting that service together. So that's our design, and we'll propose that to the store owner. And they may well go, yeah, looks like a wedding service, but it's not what I asked for. It's not what I want. And the reason is that we've missed a number of considerations. So we've said that we wanted to take the wedding service out to the whole of Italy, but yet the store owner is focused on Pompeii. That is their mission. And the reason is because they don't want people traveling around the country, because if you travel, you're at risk. You might get ambushed on the way. So it's against their principles of looking after their people. And it's also inefficient as well. The store owner can only be in one place at once. They're very much a people person. They like to walk around all their stores and all their people every day. So it's not helping efficiency for one of their goals. And likewise, they just don't have the resource to push it out to the whole of Italy yet. They want you to focus on Pompeii. So understanding these considerations is also really important. I hope you'll agree that once you've done that, you've got a lot more chance of success. So we've started off with dimensions, and then we've added in considerations as well. But what we're essentially trying to do with our wedding service is we're modeling our organization. We're saying it's got a current state, and it's defined by those 4 dimensions. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to move to a vision state, and we're going to plot that vision state in line with the organization's mission. So mission is going to drive us towards our vision. Allows us to plot the vision state, which again is defined by those 4 dimensions that we've just designed. And we're going to use goals and principles to help keep us on course so that we go for Pompeii and not Italy. And we do it in the right way. And we're going to use resource to thrust us on our way. So that will show us what's possible. We can get as far as we can by thrusting along with a resource. But yet we know that this is not going to be smooth sailing. Nothing's ever that straightforward. And the reason for that is because we've got a number of forces that are acting on us as well. So forces can be internal, external, but they can be political. It could be that we end up on lockdown because of militia uprising. It could be natural, Pompeii, volcanoes. It could be economic downturn. It could be social, people doing more weddings, less weddings, different types of weddings, don't want food, do want food. Those kind of things as well can also affect us. And these forces are outside of our sphere of control. So understanding these spheres helps us bound our context as we go through. So the sphere of control, we can direct people within our organization. We have almost complete control. We have complete control of our entities, for instance, and how we structure our organization. We then got things we can influence, and this is where we come in with our forces. We can perhaps use resource to help counter or amplify some of these effects. If there's a new wedding trend, we can chuck some resource out there, put a poster campaign up, and hey, we can promote our business here. Or we can counter the effects of by using resource to divert to another service elsewhere or something if there's political unrest. We can work around it. For instance, with lockdown, we've had to work around that by putting in video conferencing and things. So there's also a sphere of potential as well. We mentioned before that Pompeii was good, Italy was out, because it's not within our sphere of potential. Understanding that helps us not to overreach, but also to reach to our potential as well. And then finally, it's understanding we can't always see everything as well. So we've got a sphere of visibility. And these spheres will intersect, they will overlap. Sorry, I've just noticed a pop-up saying attendees on hold. Are we still there?
Yeah, we're still here.
Okay, cool. We're still broadcasting?
Yep. Let me just.
I've got a
Yes, you are.
start broadcast button. Okay,
Oh,
all
yeah,
good.
I got it. Yep.
Cool. All right, thanks. And we got a sphere of visibility as well. So for instance, COVID a year ago was well outside everyone's sphere of visibility. As I mentioned, these spheres can overlap, and outside that sphere of visibility, there's risk. So it's important to understand where it is, what we can see and what we can't. So we've got 4 components here that I hope will help give a bit of a model for how we, so there's a bit of a structure here about how to design and how to understand what we're doing. And each of these are discrete different components of the organization as well. We've also seen a technique called states where we take one state, take another state, and we work out how to get between them as well. And you can have intermediate states too. So what we're starting to build up is a framework, a holistic framework of theory. So we've got our components that are the data of our organization. How is it defined? We've started to use techniques to then interrogate those components and get out information. Then as you're aware, you then need to elevate that information up into knowledge. So we need to actually ask a question. We need to interrogate, we need to apply these techniques to the components to ask a specific question for our organization. So who are my customers? Or we'll ask a question later about value from assets. And then finally, we do that in the context of guidance. And guidance is a good practice that is applicable in all circumstances, to use the ITIL definition. This guides us to ask the right questions and apply the techniques in the right way. This is what a framework is there for. And then, of course, your organization will have its tailored guidance sitting on top of how it interprets the framework in its own specific context. So these are the elements of a holistic framework, taking both theory and then also turning it into practice as well. So where we've been quite theoretical up to now, we'll continue that for a little bit longer, and then we'll give some client examples by looking at how we use this framework to derive some known good practice for configuration management. But first, any questions?
Sorry, I was on mute. Just a comment there from David saying, I do agree with replacing people with purpose. This is quite insightful.
Cool.
So that's all we've got for now.
Yeah, and I mean, this stuff will change over time as well. I mean, this is our best guess. It's an emerging framework at the moment. So, if there's good reasons to challenge these labels on the diagram, then, go for it. The important thing is that everything's got to be tested and everything's got to be consistent. That's at the end of the day, we're here to try and work out the natural order that underpins the organization. That's the aim of this framework. And as long as we do that, it's all good.
Great, thank you.
So cool. So let's have a go at deriving configuration. So we've got our 4 elements of the framework at the top: components, techniques, methods, and guidance. We'll start with our components, and we know that there's a number of dimensions. One of those is entities. So we've seen this before. We've seen our services and practices. That's important. And what we didn't mention before was that you can bundle up services into portfolios. So portfolios can commission services. They're kind of, as you go up into department structure, they're offering a range of services. Portfolios, how you portfolio manage them effectively. Likewise, capability centers will hold a number of practices and provide that, and they could either simply hold the good practice knowledge, or they can actually start offer practices as a core service as well, almost. So you've got those capability center structures in there as well. So these are just logical theoretical structures that you can bundle your organization into. The important thing is that all of these are logical, they're defined by the organization, and you as organization owner have complete control over how you structure your operating model at the end of the day. You can draw those boxes out, you can put people in different teams, you can do what you like. Complete control. And you do that because you want to generate maximum value by aligning things with similar purposes together. Okay, so that's why you would define your entities, and you do that to generate value. We've also got assets as well. And the assets are all ascribable. So as in everything the organization does can be ascribed to part of one or more than one asset within the organization. It's the bringing together of all of this data, process, tools, and purpose together, and that generates value within the organization. So our assets themselves have value, but they also require investment and ongoing maintenance as well. So they come with a cost. So simply just allowing our assets to be, to run wild or just sit in a box somewhere, that's not going to give any value. We need to organize our assets into entities in order to deliver value. And if we were delivering value, we're in pursuit of value, we are an enterprise. So an enterprise is an organization in pursuit of value. It's an organization of assets in order to generate that value effectively. So therefore, let's ask the question, how do assets contribute to value in the organization? Because we want to make sure our assets are plugged in and delivering maximum value to mitigate against their cost. So we want to use them efficiently and effectively. I think it's a question that all organizations have. So let's use a technique of intersection. So we mentioned these, so it's just a technical term for these techniques. We're basically saying that we take one dimension and we cross it over with another. We look at how these two dimensions play together. So we're looking at entity in terms of their assets. We're effectively looking at the configuration of the assets that make up the entity, or the configuration of the entity in terms of the assets that sit underneath it. And basically configuration is just the sum of the configuration items themselves, which are uses or abstractions of the assets, and the relationships between them. Now, that's quite theoretical. Let me give you an example. So you're in a large open plan office. Your boss has just tasked you with, it's very hot, it's the middle of summer, sun blazing in through the windows. Your boss has just given you 10 portable air conditioning units, and they've said, go and deliver temperature as a service to this floor. I mean, they probably said, go and cool down the floor a bit. Now you've got these 10 portable air conditioners sitting in boxes. They're assets, they're on the balance sheet. They've got a cost, great. Not very useful in the box. You need to get them out of the box. You need to configure them around. You need to configure them and put them in different places that make most sense. You need to power them. You need to turn them on. You need to set them at a temperature, and you need to make sure they're not fighting against each other. So all of that is configuring the asset effectively and making it available for use to the organization as part of your temperature as a service. So what we've seen now, so now we're moving up to guidance. We've started to use the framework, we've applied some logic to it, and we've come out with this through the method, and we've come out with this model. So we've got entities at the top which generate value. They own or depend on configuration item in order to run. So our temperature as a service owns all of these air conditioning units, depends on them. And it's not really the air conditioning unit assets themselves, it's actually the use of those assets that we're bothered about. So it's the abstraction of them. It's kind of what temperature they set out, how much air are they blowing out. That's what we're interested in for our service, not the fact that it's the box itself. Right, that's part of the asset. The asset itself then has value and it underpins that configuration item. So then think about this from your own organization. Do you have this in place? And many organizations would say, actually, there's a few things missing here in our organization. We don't tend to traditionally link all the way up to entity. Most people would go in and they would discover, what assets they have, and they perhaps might link them up a little bit into more logical entities, but they wouldn't really go all the way to the top, certainly not up to the organizational root CI itself, the entity that is the organization, and then be able to track the value all the way up. Now, there's a good reason for tracking up to services, and we can use our Roman store as an example. So imagine you've got wood, which is an important part of making stuff hot in Roman times. You need fire, and fire depends on wood. It's all good. But from that massive wood pile in the center of the store, who's benefiting? Is it the pizza oven? Is it the focaccia, which is Roman pizza effectively, or precursor to pizza? Or is it the hypercourse, the Roman central heating, where they blow hot smoke underneath the neighbors' houses? Maybe they're offering that as a service. But who benefits by using the wood? And that's why you need to link them up to entity, so that you can see who's actually depending on this wood and who's actually using it, where it actually benefits. But then it's all well and good just tracking dependency as well. But notice that in most organizations, we don't track the concept of ownership all the way up. We don't have traceable ownership and accountability. And really, this comes in with who's responsible for restocking that wood. Right, so we mentioned earlier that there was a problem in the store that every day in the morning, no one would restock it because everyone just thought it was everyone else's responsibility and they were all busy serving customers. So who is responsible for this? And it's not just restocking the wood, because the wood's got to come in from outside as well. It's got to be chopped. There's a lot of process involved with those getting those sticks ready for the fire. So who owns that, and what's the chain of ownership across all of these configuration items? You know, for instance, is it owned by the hypercourse? Are they primary, and are they just providing it as a service to the pizza service, or is wood as a service in its own right? You know, these are the questions that we want to ask, and having ownership in there really helps us. And you'll also notice from COBIT as well that having single traceable ownership and accountability is critical for good governance as well. So maintaining that view in configuration is really helpful. So what we've said here is that we want to organize our assets into entities for the pursuit of value. So that is the definition of an enterprise, effectively, an organization in pursuit of value, the definition we propose. And we said about the single ownership hierarchy. This kind of tells us that there are more classes, relationship classes that exist. We can start to group stuff up, because many of you will have worked with configuration management before, and you'll have seen things like you've seen things like runs on, consumes, uses, depends on. I mean, these are all effectively dependency relationships. They're saying that if item A uses item B, then it's dependent on it, effectively. But ownership is a class in its own right of relationship, and we can have these two coexisting peacefully. I mean, you can both own and depend on something, and indeed, if you own it, you probably do depend on it. So you could even use the ownership to infer dependence, but you can have both in, and you can depend on something without owning it. Someone else owns it. It's important to keep these distinctions, because if you own it, then you're responsible for fixing it, ultimately. And if you don't fix it, then it goes up the chain, because it's impacting the service levels on the higher entities as well, all the way up to the CEO getting involved. So this is a model that we've kind of derived, and these are concepts. This should be thought of as a journey, effectively, and tailored for your organization as you require. So it's just saying that these things exist. They seem like good practice derived from the framework. But now we'll have a look at how this has been used in practice as well for the New Zealand government clients. So I mentioned this right at the beginning. This was New Zealand government client wanting to transform their IT department, wanting to put in place a new operating model, SIAM-based, making everything a lot more efficient. And as you go through ITIL and you look at all the processes, configuration management's at the heart of all of them. And it can really start to power and automate stuff. It can help you route work. And that was one of the ways that we started to automate stuff. So if you select a service or a component, it will route it to the team that's specified on the CI that's responsible. I mean, the database of configuration is hugely useful, and you can route a lot of logic on it. You really start to automate a lot of stuff using it. That requires you to have a decent configuration database in place. So they've done what many organizations have done, which is to turn on discovery, hoover in 10,000 odd CIs into there with no relationships between them, and then task someone manually to spend 3 years going through and trying to link everything together. And needless to say, they got through about 10 or 20% of it. It was not that much. So we couldn't wait that long. We had to basically put that to one side. And then we went, well, we have an operating model. They've just agreed it. They've just stood that up. Everyone's signed off on it. Why don't we chuck that straight in? We've got portfolio, we've got services, we've got the teams involved. Chuck all of that in. That's your entity level in there. And now you've also got owners attached to it as well, and you've got a chain of accountability in there as well. So now what we can start to do is we can say that, okay, we're going to route work to you. So anything that's tagged with your component is going to get routed to your team. If you would like a bit more granularity in that, then please specify. Give us those components that sit underneath your parent components. Give us that detail, and then you can route work appropriately within that. So that's a real good incentive for them to take ownership and do that. And then also we say to them, please also tell us what you're dependent on as well, because a central team never really knows what everyone's dependent on. And this is why CMDB can get real messy, because central team has to do lots of workshops. It's quite difficult. Whereas if you go to these owners themselves and you say, tell us what you're dependent on, they should know. They just don't often see the reason of giving it and the reason of spending time to pull it all together for you. But if you say to them, tell us what you're dependent on, because If something changes with that dependency, we'll let you know and we'll give you a say. We'll inform you of anything that happens to it. And most critically, if that dependency goes down, we will not hold you accountable for your service level because of someone else's problem. Therefore, immediately, they're massively incentivized to give you the dependencies. So now once the one thing goes down, there is accountability for who should fix it, and there's also an understanding of the impact and not double penalizing of people for things. So a real good incentive there to do that. So as I mentioned, this intuitively starts to drive the ownership and accountability. It means we can start to delegate some responsibility out and maintain a rather large and cumbersome configuration, a complex configuration effectively. And then, as you've seen before, we've started to derive that link between asset and entity. We can now start to track value as well through that. So it's the first step of doing it, which you just can't do with the many-to-many relationships that dependencies create. It creates a web, it creates a bit of a mess. You need to put some structure around it as well. So you can have those dependencies, but also have ownership, which gives you that clean hierarchy. And this is where the clean hierarchy comes in. Because you're saying, oh, well, that's good. Okay, we've got this nice structure, perfect structure of the organization. But work comes in from people at random times, and they just don't tag stuff with correctly. They don't categorize it correctly. And part of the reasons that is that the CMDB is quite messy in there, and they don't know what to pick, and there's similar things and whatever. But you see, the thing is that we're often trying to get people to do it right first time, and that's not the way this works. Right, what you really want to be doing is capturing this at source. So you need to be going out and giving it to your end users to interact with and actually put the configuration item in. Now you might be thinking, oh my goodness, we can't expose this to the end users, it's too messy. But look at it again, it's a structured hierarchy, it's the operating model. And most people within the organization should know what the operating model is, otherwise it's not been communicated particularly effectively. They know roughly what teams, roughly what departments are in there. So let's say, to use the IT example, if they come up with the website and they say there's an issue with that, well, they can stick it at level 2 service there. Now, that might be wrong. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. They've just got to try, okay? And we make it mandatory, so they have to try. So they will say it's with the website. But then the website team picks it up and goes, no, that's a load balancer issue. Website's gone down because of load balance. That's network's problem. Okay, so website assign on to networks then by saying that it's a load balancing issue. So you see, we've got it there in 2 hops. Now, as your organization grows and as you become more enterprise, you would traditionally end up with a service desk that covers everything. But you can see that service desk is never going to have the depth of experience to be able to send stuff across in 2 hops. They're going to send it to the approximate, and then they're going to send it to the absolute later. And so you end up with 3 hops. Whereas if you put it into the right ballpark first, then they have much more chance of getting it right second time. And it's really an iterative journey, this as well. You can gradually move it down the layers as the issue becomes known. And that also helps you track what people reported the issue with versus what the issue was actually with. You can get synonyms into there. You can start making it a bit more intuitive for people. And you can also return contextual content as well off the back of this as well. So if they put in something with a service, you can show all the relevant knowledge articles related to it and that kind of thing as well. So hopefully they've seen some kind of practical examples there of how we can use this configuration management. So we'll just wrap up. We're close to the end now. I hope that's kind of shown where you can actually take the framework and actually start to use it to derive some good practice. So today we started by asking the question, is service management a panacea for uncertain times? And we noted the huge amount of uncertainty and disruption that's existing at the moment, this exponential growth being held back by complexity and chaos. We asked the question of how have we dealt with it before, and we've seen IT putting in place service management, provide service levels, provide structure, and it's been able to really help IT cope. I mean, imagine IT without it. But as we said, you can't just throw that over the fence to the business and expect it to work because we need to take IT out of the equation. So we tried to do that. We took IT out. We went back in time to the ancient working practices, saw the ancient working practices of the Romans, and then we put some of those principles together and tried to create a framework for true enterprise service management that's completely agnostic of IT. We were then able to use that framework to derive some good practice for configuration. Now, this is an emerging framework. It is available today. There's a link on here and that will go out with the pack. So please do go in there, have a look at it, ask some questions. And as we go through. I think there's one final thing to say, and that is just that if for anybody who is worried about the current uncertainty that's out there in this disruption, I think you can take comfort, hopefully, from this, that while the technology will always change, the ways of working are fundamentally unchanged in millennia. So by hanging on to these ways of working, we can then overcome this disruption because we've got something to anchor ourselves to, and that helps us cure this uncertainty. Thank you very much.